The scream that echoed through Laboratory 7 wasn't supposed to happen. Not like that. Not with such precision. As Senior Research Coordinator Blim of the Korthak Science Division, had heard thousands of fear responses during my 30 cycles of xenobiological study. The usual suspects. Panicked wailing, desperate pleading, incoherent babbling as primitive minds shattered under stress. Standard stuff, really. Predictable as binary code. But this? This was different. The human female, designation Subject 23, hung suspended in our containment field, and she was laughing, not the broken, hysterical laughter of a mind snapping under pressure. No! This was something far worse. This was the sound of someone who found our entire operation amusing. Well, she said, her voice carrying that peculiar human accent we'd identified as originating from their North American continent. You boys certainly know how to make a girl feel special. My secondary pair of arms twitched involuntarily. In all my research, fear subjects didn't usually crack jokes. Subject displays unexpected behavioral patterns, I muttered into my recording device, keeping my primary eyes fixed on the monitoring screens while my secondary pair watched her directly. Initial terror response appears to be absent. Dr. Kelm, my junior researcher, leaned closer to his workstation. His green-scaled hide had taken on that nervous purple tinge it always got when experiments deviated from protocol. Sir, should we increase the fear stimulus intensity? Patience. Kelm. Observe first, react second. Basic scientific method. The human who had introduced herself during capture as Maya Peterson, and you are making a big mistake, rotated slowly in the containment field, those unsettling binocular eyes of hers taking in every detail of our laboratory. Her species' visual system was laughably primitive compared to ours, yet somehow she seemed to see everything that mattered. So, Maya said, conversationally, I'm guessing this is the part where you explain your evil plan? Because I have got to tell you, the whole floating in a blue bubble thing is pretty cliché. Did you guys watch a lot of Earth movies before you planned this kidnapping? I exchanged a confused glance with Kellen. Movies. What were movies? Subject exhibits continued verbal defiance despite isolation and restraint, I recorded. Displays knowledge of Terran cultural references unknown to research team. Maya's head tilted at an angle that would have snapped most vertebrates' necks. Humans, we'd learned, were disturbingly flexible. Oh, you are recording this. How thoughtful. I always wanted to be in a study. Tell me, what's the hypothesis here? Are you trying to figure out what makes humans tick? Because, spoiler alert, it's usually caffeine and spite. Begin phase 1 of the fear response protocol, I instructed Kelm, ignoring her strange words. Caffeine? Spite? These humans and their incomprehensible concepts. The laboratory lights dimmed, and our carefully designed holographic projections began to manifest around the containment field. We'd spent years perfecting these illusions based on psychological profiles gathered from human media transmissions. Towering creatures with far too many teeth, endless voids that triggered their species' innate fear of falling. Grotesque imagery designed to exploit their primitive visual cortex. Maya watched the display with the same expression my younglings wore when I showed them educational videos about stellar formation. Mild interest, but hardly terrified. Huh, she said, nodding slowly. That's actually pretty good work. The detail on the tentacles is impressive. Though I have to ask, did you base this on human horror fiction? Because this looks suspiciously like something from our entertainment industry. My tertiary stomach dropped. How could she possibly know that? The truth was embarrassing. Our research team had indeed used human broadcasts as reference material. Their fiction contained such wonderfully detailed depictions of what their species found frightening that we'd assumed it would be simple to replicate the effect. Apparently we'd missed something crucial. Phase 1 appears ineffective, Kelm whispered, his voice barely audible through our internal comm system. Her stress hormone levels are actually decreasing. Decreasing? That was impossible. Well, every species in the known galaxy showed elevated stress responses to unknown environments and implied threats. It was universal. It was biological law. Phase 2, I ordered. my confidence wavering for the first time in decades. The holographic horrors vanished, replaced by something far more insidious. Using our psychological profiles, we began projecting scenarios designed to trigger human emotional vulnerabilities. Images of her family members in danger, her home planet burned, she presumably cared about being systematically destroyed. Maya's reaction was immediate and terrifying in its unpredictability. She began to nod approvingly, like a teacher reviewing a student's work. "Now that's more like it," she said. "You did your homework. That's definitely my sister Janet, and you even got her new haircut right. The burning city is a nice touch too. Very apocalyptic. Very motivational." I couldn't help asking, abandoning my professional detachment. "Oh, absolutely. See, here's the thing about humans that you probably missed in all your research." Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut hyperspace. "We don't just fear, we get angry. Really, really angry. And when humans get angry, well," she paused, letting the silence stretch like a quantum string. "Things tend to explode. That's when the first containment field fluctuation began. It was subtle at first. Just a minor oscillation in the energy matrix holding her suspended. Our instruments barely registered it, but I'd been working with containment technology for long enough to recognize the early signs of system instability. "Kelm, run a diagnostic on the containment grid," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Already on it, sir. All systems show green. No anomalies detected. But the fluctuations were increasing. The blue energy field surrounding Maya began to pulse with an irregular rhythm that reminded me uncomfortably of a heartbeat. A very angry heartbeat. "You know what the real problem is with your approach," Maya continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing instability around her. "You assumed that fear and terror were the same thing. They are not. Fear is what prey feels when it's being hunted. Terror is what predators feel when they realize they have made a terrible mistake." The containment field pulsed again, stronger this time. Strong enough that the harmonics made my inner ears ache. "Sir," Kelm's voice was climbing toward panic frequencies, "the containment matrix is showing stress fractures. But according to all readings, the subject isn't doing anything." I studied Maya more closely with all four eyes. She hung motionless in the field, not struggling, not fighting, not even breathing particularly hard. Yet somehow, impossibly, the most sophisticated prison technology in the galaxy was beginning to fail around her. "Tell me," Maya said, her voice taking on a conversational tone that was somehow more threatening than any scream. "Did your research cover human psychology beyond fear responses? Did you look into our fight-or-flight mechanisms? Our stress adaptation? Our rather impressive track record of survival against impossible odds?" The containment field flickered. For just a nanosecond it failed completely before the backup systems engaged. In that brief instant, Maya's feet touched the laboratory floor. The sound they made, just two soft footsteps, echoed through the chamber like gunshots. "Oh," she said, and her smile widened. "That's interesting. Emergency protocols." I barked into the comm system. "Security team to Laboratory 7. Code Amber Containment Breach." "You might want to make that code red," Maya suggested helpfully. "Because here's another fun fact about humans that your research probably missed. We are really, really good at learning from our mistakes. And we only need to make them once." The containment field failed again. This time for a full second, Maya landed gracefully, bent her knees to absorb the impact, and looked around the laboratory with those predatory binocular eyes. "Nice place you have got here," she said, walking slowly toward our control station, while the backup containment system struggled to reactivate. "Very clinical. Very organized. I bet you are real proud of all this equipment. Subject has achieved partial containment breach." I spoke rapidly into my recorder, backing away from the approaching human, requesting immediate evacuation protocols and hazmat containment. "Hazmat?" Maya laughed, and the sound made my scales stand on end. "Oh, you think I'm toxic? That's adorable. But you are thinking too small." She reached our control station and looked down at the complex array of instruments we'd spent years perfecting. Her expression was the same one I'd seen on security footage of human engineers examining broken machinery they were about to repair. "You know what your real problem is?" she asked, placing one hand gently on Kelm's workstation. "You studied human fear, but you never bothered to study human curiosity. And let me tell you something about human curiosity. It's absolutely ruthless." The lights in Laboratory 7 began to flicker. Not the controlled dimming of our fear protocols, but genuine electrical instability. Our instruments started registering energy spikes that should have been impossible. "Sir," Kelm's voice cracked with terror. "She's not doing anything. Her bioreadings are normal, but somehow she's affecting our power grid." Maya looked up at him with genuine surprise. "Bioreadings? Oh, honey, you are still thinking like prey. You are looking for physical changes, aren't you? Elevated heart rate, increased adrenaline, stress hormones, all the little chemical markers that tell you when something is scared." She reached over and tapped one of our monitoring screens with her finger. The display immediately showed her vital signs, all perfectly normal for a resting human. "Here's the thing," she continued, her voice still maddeningly calm. "When humans are really truly angry, not scared, not panicked, but genuinely furious, we don't get excited. We get cold. We get focused. We get very, very precise." The containment field failed completely. The backup system screamed warnings in 17 different languages as Maya stepped fully into our laboratory space. No longer a subject, but suddenly, impossibly, the predator in a room full of prey. "So tell me," she said, walking toward the main computer core that controlled every system in the facility, "exactly how much of your research data would you say is backed up off-site?" I felt all four of my hearts skip beats simultaneously. "Security team," I screamed into the comm. "Where is my security team?" "Oh, them?" Maya glanced back at me with that terrible smile. "I'm sure they will be along shortly. Though you might want to mention that humans are also really good at social engineering. We have had thousands of years of practice lying to each other, manipulating each other, and generally being deceptive little creatures." She paused at the computer core, her hand hovering over the access panel. "For instance," she continued, "when your security team was randomly assigned to capture me 3 days ago, do you think it was really random? Or do you think maybe, just maybe, someone had been feeding your intelligence networks exactly the information they needed to make them think I was an ideal test subject?" The laboratory fell silent except for the increasingly frantic beeping of our failing systems. "No," I whispered, the implications hitting me like a plasma torpedo to the cerebral cortex. "Oh yes," Maya confirmed cheerfully. "See, here's the thing about humans that your research definitely missed. We are pack hunters. We don't hunt alone. We hunt in groups. And when you take one of us—" She pressed her hand against the computer core access panel. "The rest of us come looking." Every screen in Laboratory 7 lit up simultaneously. Not with our research data, not with containment protocols, not with anything that should have been possible. Instead, they showed the exterior of our research station. And surrounding it, like insects around a light source, were ships. Human ships. Hundreds of them hanging motionless in space, broadcasting a single message on repeat. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have 60 seconds to return our operative and surrender your facility for inspection. Compliance is not optional." I stared at the screens, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Impossible. Our facility is classified. Hidden. No one knows its location. Maya's laugh was soft and genuinely delighted. "Oh, sweetie. You have been studying human fear for 30 years and you never learned the most important thing about our species?" She turned to face me directly, and for the first time since her capture, I saw something genuinely terrifying in her eyes. Not fear, not panic, but the cold, calculating intelligence of a predator that had been playing with its prey all along. "Humans don't fear the dark," she said quietly. "We are the dark. We are the thing that goes bump in the night. We are the monster under the bed. And when you threaten one of us, you don't just get to study our fear responses." The screens flickered again, showing human soldiers moving through the corridors of our station with the fluid precision of apex predators who knew exactly where they were going. You get to experience them. The laboratory door exploded inward as our security finally arrived. But instead of the Korvac guards I expected, human soldiers in powered armor flowed into the room like water, their weapons trained on every corner, their movements coordinated with the precision of a hive mind. "Maya," one of them called out. "You okay?" "Just peachy, Marcus," she replied casually. "Though I think our hosts here need a lesson in proper guest etiquette." I fell to my knees. All my research, all my certainty about the nature of intelligent life crumbling around me like a house of quantum cards. "Please," I whispered. "We were just studying. We were just trying to understand." Maya knelt down beside me, her hand gentle on my shoulder. When she spoke, her voice was kind, almost maternal, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "You want to understand human fear? You want to know what we are really afraid of? Let me tell you." She leaned closer, her whisper barely audible over the sound of my own panicked breathing. "We are afraid of becoming like you. We are afraid of losing our compassion, our empathy, our basic decency. We are afraid of treating other sentient beings like laboratory specimens." She stood up, brushing imaginary dust off her clothes. "But here's the beautiful irony," she continued, her voice returning to that terrible conversational tone. "When someone threatens us, when someone hurts us, when someone makes us afraid, we don't become the victims you expect. We become the very thing we are afraid of becoming." The human soldiers had finished securing the laboratory. One of them approached Maya with what looked like a portable computer terminal. "All systems are under our control," he reported. 37 Korvac personnel in custody. 0 casualties so far. "Excellent. Make sure medical teams check everyone for psychological trauma. And I want their research data preserved but quarantined. Some of it might actually be useful if we can filter out the ethical problems." She turned back to me, and I saw something in her expression that was worse than anger, worse than hatred. I saw disappointment. "The really sad part," she said, "is that we would have shared our psychological research with you if you'd just asked nicely. Humans are actually pretty generous with scientific knowledge. We like helping other species understand the universe." She paused, considering. "But you decided to take what you wanted instead of asking for it. You decided to treat us like things instead of people. And that," she shook her head sadly, "that was a really bad choice." One of her soldiers approached with a datapad. "Admiral Chen wants to know if you are ready for extraction." "Almost," Maya replied. "Just finishing up here." She looked around Laboratory 7 one final time, taking in all our sophisticated equipment, our carefully designed research protocols, our life's work in understanding the nature of fear. "You know what the funniest part is?" she asked me. "You spent all this time studying human fear, and you never realized the most basic truth about our species." I looked up at her, my worldview shattered, my scientific certainty destroyed, waiting for the final revelation that would complete my education in terror. "What truth?" I managed to whisper. Maya's smile was brilliant and terrible and absolutely sincere. "We are not afraid of monsters," she said. "We are the monsters. We have just decided to be nice about it." The human soldiers began filing out of the laboratory, their movements as coordinated and professional as their entry. Maya followed them toward the door, then stopped and looked back at me one final time. "Oh, and one more thing," she added casually. "You might want to review your research methodology, because if this is how you study fear," she gestured around the ruined laboratory, at the broken containment systems, at the complete and total failure of everything we'd built, "I'd hate to see how you study love." And with that absolutely terrifying thought hanging in the air like a quantum bomb, she walked out of Laboratory 7, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my certainty and the growing realization that humanity had just taught the galaxy a lesson that would echo through history. We had captured one human to study their fear. Instead, they had shown us what terror really looked like. And somehow, impossibly, I knew this was only the beginning. 3 hours after my world ended, I found myself in what the humans politely called a consultation room. It was, by any reasonable definition, A cell, but the humans had furnished it with soft seating, adequate lighting, and what they claimed was coffee, a brown liquid that tasted like liquid motivation mixed with bitter regret. They'd also provided me with a human escort, a pleasant female named Dr. Lisa Park, who seemed genuinely interested in my well-being. This, I was beginning to understand, was how humans conducted psychological warfare. They made you comfortable while they destroyed everything you thought you knew about reality. So, Dr. Park said, settling into her chair with the casual grace that all humans seem to possess, "Tell me about your research. I'm genuinely curious about your methodology." I stared at her across the small table, my 4 eyes trying to process the surreal nature of this conversation. 6 hours ago, I had been the senior research coordinator of the most advanced xenobiology facility in Korthak space. Now I was being interviewed by my former test subject's colleague as if we were discussing weather patterns. "You are asking me about my research?" I managed to croak. "After you invaded my station and destroyed my life's work?" Dr. Park's eyebrows rose in what I was learning to recognize as human surprise. "Destroyed? Oh no, we haven't destroyed anything. We have preserved all your data. We are just reviewing it for ethical compliance." She pulled out a small tablet and began scrolling through what looked suspiciously like my personal research files. "Actually, some of your neurological mapping work is quite impressive," she continued. "Your understanding of fear responses across different species shows real insight. It's just your execution that needs work." "My execution?" "Well, the whole kidnapping sentient beings for non-consensual experimentation thing is a bit of a red flag in the scientific community," Dr. Park said with the kind of gentle tone one might use to explain basic mathematics to a youngling. "Generally speaking, ethical research requires something called informed consent." I felt my secondary stomachs clench. "Informed consent? It's when you ask permission before you experiment on people," she explained patiently. "Revolutionary concept, I know." The human capacity for sarcasm was apparently limitless. "But how can you study genuine fear responses if the subjects know they are being tested?" I protested, my scientific training overriding my growing terror. "The knowledge would contaminate the results." Dr. Park paused in her scrolling and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. It was somewhere between pity and professional disappointment. "Coordinator Blim," she said slowly, "may I ask you a question? I suppose you will regardless of my answer. In all your years of research, did you ever consider that maybe, just maybe, the reason your results were inconsistent was because you were studying trauma responses instead of actual fear?" I blinked, all 4 eyes in sequence. "I don't understand the distinction." "Fear," Dr. Park said, leaning forward slightly, "is a natural, healthy response to perceived danger. It helps organisms survive. Trauma is what happens when that fear response is triggered artificially, repeatedly, and without any chance of resolution." She turned her tablet around so I could see the screen. It showed brain scans, dozens of them, all labeled with species designations. I recognized from my own research files. "What you have been studying for 30 years isn't fear," she continued. "It's psychological torture responses. You have been documenting how different species break under stress, not how they process and overcome natural threats." The coffee in my stomach suddenly felt like acid. That's not possible. Our methodology was scientifically sound." "Your methodology was scientifically horrific," Dr. Park corrected gently. "But that's okay. We are going to help you learn better techniques." "Help me?" My voice climbed several octaves. "You are going to help me? After you participated in a system that treated sentient beings like laboratory equipment?" Dr. Park shrugged. "Sure. See, here's another thing about humans that your research probably missed. We believe in rehabilitation." She stood up and walked to the small window that looked out onto the corridor. Through it, I could see other Korthak researchers being escorted by human personnel. None of them appeared to be in restraints. None of them looked injured. They all looked confused, but unharmed. "What are you doing to my colleagues?" I asked. "Teaching them," Dr. Park replied. "Same thing we are doing with you. See? We reviewed your facility records. 90% of your staff are mid-level researchers who were just following orders. They are not evil. They are just poorly educated about ethical scientific practices. She returned to her seat and pulled up another file on her tablet. Take your assistant, Dr. Kelm, for example. According to his personal files, he joined your research team because he wanted to help develop better medical treatments for PTSD across different species. That's actually a noble goal. It is. Of course it is. The problem is that your institution taught him that the way to understand trauma was to create it. We are going to show him how to study trauma recovery instead. Dr. Park's fingers danced across her tablet screen, bringing up a complex chart filled with data I didn't recognize. This is from the Vancouver Institute for Interspecies Psychology, she explained. They have been studying fear responses and trauma recovery across 47 different species for the past 15 years. All with informed consent. All with proper therapeutic protocols. All with better results than anything your facility ever produced. I stared at the data, my scientific training warring with my growing cognitive dissonance. Better results? Oh, much better. Turns out that when you study beings who aren't being tortured, you get much cleaner data about how their minds actually work. Who knew? The sarcasm was becoming easier to identify, though no less devastating. But that's impossible, I insisted. How can you generate genuine fear responses in a controlled environment without actual threat? Dr. Park's smile was the kind expression I'd seen her species use when teaching children. Virtual reality. For starters. Carefully controlled scenarios that feel real but are completely safe. Neurological monitoring that tracks fear responses without causing actual distress. Post-experience counseling to ensure no lasting psychological damage. She paused, considering. But the real breakthrough came when we realized something your research never considered. The most interesting fear responses don't come from being threatened. They come from being afraid for someone else. I don't understand. Parental protective instincts, pack loyalty responses, altruistic danger assessment. The fear you feel when someone you care about is threatened is actually much more complex and informationally rich than personal survival fear. Dr. Park pulled up another set of data. For instance, we have learned more about Yexian fear psychology by studying their responses to simulated threats against their offspring than your facility learned in 12 years of direct threat exposure. My worldview was developing additional stress fractures. But the Yexians were some of our most successful subjects. We documented 17 different fear response patterns. You documented 17 different ways to break their minds, Dr. Park corrected. We have identified 43 distinct protective response patterns just in the first phase of ethical study. She leaned back in her chair, watching me process this information. See, this is the fundamental error in your approach. You assumed that fear was simple, primitive, something to be triggered and observed like a chemical reaction. But fear is actually one of the most sophisticated survival mechanisms in the known universe. It's not just an emotional response. It's a complex decision-making system that balances risk assessment, resource allocation, social dynamics, and long-term planning. You are saying our entire theoretical framework was wrong? I'm saying your entire theoretical framework was evil, Dr. Park said matter-of-factly. But wrong is probably accurate too. A soft chime sounded from her tablet. She glanced at it and nodded. Ah, perfect timing. Maya's ready for her presentation. Maya? You mean Subject 23. Dr. Park's expression hardened slightly. Maya Peterson, Doctor of Psychology, specialist in cross-species communication and current consultant to the Terran Ethics Review Board. Not Subject 23. She's a doctor? PhD in Xenup Psychology from Earth University, Masters in Interspecies Communication from the Mars Institute, and undergraduate degrees in both computer science and military strategy from the Luna Academy. The stress fractures in my worldview widened into chasms. But her psychological profile indicated she was a civilian cargo worker with no advanced education. Yeah, about that. Dr. Park stood up and gestured toward the door. Maya's going to explain exactly how badly you screwed up your intelligence gathering. Should be educational. We walked through corridors that had been my domain for decades, but now felt completely foreign. Human personnel moved through the facility with the confidence of people who belonged there, while my former colleagues were being escorted to what the humans called educational sessions. The main conference room had been converted into something resembling a lecture hall. Most of my research staff was already seated, along with several humans in what appeared to be academic robes. At the front of the room stood Maya Peterson, but she looked nothing like the frightened civilian we'd captured. Gone was the simple cargo worker uniform. Instead, she wore what I was beginning to recognize as formal human academic attire. Her hair was pulled back in a severe style that somehow made her look both more intelligent and more dangerous. Most unsettling of all, she seemed completely at ease, as if addressing a room full of beings who'd recently held her prisoner was just another day at the office. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "I'm Dr. Maya Peterson, and I'm here to talk to you about the fundamental differences between studying fear and causing terror." She gestured to a large display screen that showed what looked like a complex organizational chart. "But first, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the massive intelligence failure in the room." The display changed to show a series of documents: shipping manifests, personnel records, travel logs, all bearing my signature as authorization. 3 months ago, your intelligence network identified me as an ideal test subject. Single female civilian cargo worker, minimal education, no military training, no significant social connections. Perfect for a quick grab-and-study operation. Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut through hyperspace. "There's just one tiny problem with that assessment. Every single piece of information in that profile was fabricated." The room fell silent except for the sound of 37 Korthak researchers having their minds blown simultaneously. "My real shipping logs," Maya continued, bringing up a new set of documents, "show that I have been conducting covert psychological assessments of Korthak research facilities for the past 2 years. My real employment records indicate I'm a senior consultant for the Terran Defense Fleet's Xenological Warfare Division. And my real social connections include approximately half the human military command structure." Dr. Kelm, sitting 2 rows ahead of me, made a sound like a deflating atmospheric converter. "But the beautiful part," Maya continued, her voice taking on that conversational tone I'd learned to fear, "isn't that you got bad intelligence. The beautiful part is how you got it." The display showed a complex network diagram with dozens of connections between various Korthak intelligence assets and what appeared to be human information sources. "See, we have known about your facility for 3 years. We have known about your research methods for 3 years. And we have been systematically feeding your intelligence network false information for 3 years." She paused to let that sink in. "Every cargo manifest you intercepted, we wrote it. Every personnel file you accessed, we created it. Every communication you monitored, we scripted it." The silence in the room was so complete I could hear my own heartbeats echoing in my secondary chest cavity. "But here's the really interesting part," Maya said, advancing to a new slide. "We didn't just fool your intelligence network, we studied it. We mapped it. We learned how your species processes information, how you make decisions, how you assess threats." The new display showed a detailed analysis of Korthak's psychological patterns, far more detailed than anything we'd ever compiled about any other species. "Turns out," Maya continued cheerfully, "when you spend 3 years pretending to be incompetent cargo workers while actually being trained psychological warfare specialists, you learn some fascinating things about how other species think." She gestured to the data on screen. "For instance, did you know that Korthak decision-making follows a predictable pattern of risk escalation? When presented with intelligence that seems too good to be true, your species consistently chooses to believe it rather than investigate further." Dr. Kelm raised one of his secondary arms. "Are you saying we are naturally gullible?" "I'm saying you are naturally optimistic," Maya replied, "which is actually a lovely trait. It just makes you vulnerable to species who are naturally paranoid." She clicked to the next slide, which showed comparative psychological profiles. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. Our default assumption is that any new situation is potentially dangerous and should be thoroughly investigated before we take action. Korthaks evolved as apex predators on a planet with abundant resources and minimal environmental threats. Your default assumption is that new opportunities should be exploited quickly before they disappear." Maya's expression grew more serious. These aren't flaws in either species. They are successful evolutionary strategies that worked perfectly well for millions of years. The problem only arises when species with different cognitive frameworks interact without understanding those differences. She clicked to a new slide showing what appeared to be a detailed timeline. Which brings us to the real purpose of this operation. We didn't infiltrate your facility just to rescue one person. We did it to understand how your species conducts scientific research, so we can help you develop better methods. You want to help us? I found myself asking, my voice barely above a whisper. Maya turned to look directly at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, her expression was completely sincere. Coordinator Blim, your species has one of the most advanced neurological research programs in the galaxy. Your understanding of brain chemistry is centuries ahead of ours. Your medical technology could revolutionize mental health treatment for dozens of species. She paused. The only problem is that your research methods are so horrifically unethical that no one else will work with you. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a toxic atmosphere. But that's okay, Maya continued, her voice taking on a tone I was learning to recognize as human optimism. Because ethics can be taught, methodology can be improved, and scientific collaboration can benefit everyone. She clicked to a final slide that showed what appeared to be a joint research proposal. The Terran Institute for Ethical Xenopsychology would like to invite the Corthax Science Division to participate in a collaborative research program. We will provide ethical oversight and methodology training. You will provide your advanced neurological expertise. Together, we can study fear, trauma, and recovery across multiple species in ways that actually help people instead of hurting them. Maya looked around the room, making eye contact with each of us in turn. But here's the thing about collaboration, she said quietly. It requires trust. And trust requires that everyone involved commits to never ever treating sentient beings like laboratory equipment again. The room was so quiet I could hear the station's atmospheric processors humming in the distance. So, Maya said, her voice returning to that cheerful conversational tone that somehow managed to be both reassuring and absolutely terrifying. Who wants to learn how to do science without accidentally committing war crimes? And despite everything, despite the invasion, the psychological manipulation, the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about humans, I found myself raising one of my primary arms. Because the alternative I was beginning to understand was remaining the monster I'd never realized I'd become. And humans, it turned out, were very good at helping monsters become something better, even when those monsters had tried to study their fear. 6 weeks after my education in terror began, I found myself doing something I had never imagined possible. I was asking a test subject for permission. "Dr. Yexel," I said, my voice carefully modulated to convey respect rather than authority, "would you be willing to participate in a voluntary study of protective fear responses? The session would last approximately 2 hours, with full monitoring of your comfort levels, and you can stop at any time." The Yexian researcher looked at me with those large, expressive eyes that had once made his species such ideal subjects for fear studies. But instead of the terror I'd grown accustomed to seeing, there was curiosity. Genuine scientific curiosity. "What would the study involve?" he asked, settling into the comfortable chair the humans had insisted we provide for all research participants. "We would show you holographic scenarios depicting potential threats to Yexian younglings," I explained, reading from the protocol Dr. Park had helped me develop. "We want to understand how parental protective instincts influence risk assessment and decision-making processes, and this would help other species. According to our human consultants, understanding protective responses could improve emergency protocol design for multi-species environments. Space stations, colonies, diplomatic facilities." Dr. Yexel nodded slowly. "That does sound useful. And you said I can stop at any time?" "At any time," I confirmed. "We have also arranged for a counselor to be present during the session, and a follow-up consultation afterward to ensure no lasting stress effects." "Then yes, I'd be happy to help." I stared at him for a moment, still struggling to process the concept of voluntary participation. In 30 years of research, no subject had ever been happy to help. Dr. Park, who had been observing from the corner of the room, stepped forward with her ever-present tablet. "Dr. Yexel, Thank you for agreeing to participate. Before we begin, I need to review the consent protocols with you. This is a standard form that explains exactly what we will be doing, what data we will collect, how it will be used, and what your rights are as a research participant. She handed him a document that was approximately 10 times longer than any paperwork we'd ever used in my facility. Take your time reading through this, she continued. Ask questions about anything that's unclear. And remember, agreeing to participate now doesn't mean you are locked in. You can change your mind at any point, even after we have started. Dr. Yexel began reading through the consent form, while I watched in fascination. The human approach to research was so fundamentally different from everything I'd been taught that it felt like learning an entirely new science. Dr. Park, I said quietly, may I ask you a question? Of course. Doesn't all this consideration compromise the validity of the research? If subjects know they can stop at any time, won't that affect their genuine responses? Dr. Park's smile was the patient expression I'd come to associate with human teaching moments. Coordinator, let me ask you something. In all your years of research, how many of your subjects exhibited what you classified as anomalous responses, behaviors that didn't fit your expected patterns? I thought back through decades of data. Approximately 30% of subjects showed unexpected reactions. We typically discarded that data as contaminated by individual psychological variations. 30%, Dr. Park repeated. And it never occurred to you that maybe those anomalous responses were actually the most accurate data you were collecting? I don't understand. Fear responses in torture situations aren't representative of how beings actually process threats in normal circumstances. She explained, when someone is helpless, terrified, and has no control over their situation, their brain chemistry is completely different from someone who feels safe and empowered. She pulled up a comparative analysis on her tablet. Look at this data from our previous research. When we study fear responses in controlled, consensual environments, we get much more nuanced and useful information. We see how different personality types process threats, how cultural backgrounds influence risk assessment, how social support systems affect coping mechanisms. But most importantly, she continued, we see how beings actually behave when they are afraid in real-world situations, not when they are being systematically broken. Dr. Yexel looked up from his consent form. I have a question about Section 7. It mentions that you will be recording my neurological responses. What specific brain activity will you be monitoring? Dr. Park immediately shifted her attention to him, her expression completely focused and professional. We will be using non-invasive scanners to monitor activity in your amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and the neural clusters associated with social bonding and Yexian physiology. The data helps us understand how protective instincts interact with rational threat assessment. And this data will be anonymized completely. Your identity will be replaced with a random numerical designation, and all biometric identifiers will be removed from the research files. What about long-term storage? Research data is automatically deleted after 5 years unless you specifically consent to longer retention. And even then, you can request deletion at any time. I watched this exchange with growing amazement. The level of consideration, the detailed explanations, the multiple layers of protection for the research subject. It was like watching an entirely different species conduct science, which I was beginning to realize was exactly what it was. Dr. Park, I said during a break in their discussion, may I ask how long it took humanity to develop these ethical protocols? Oh, we didn't develop them, she replied matter-of-factly. We stole them. My 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Stole them from the Centaurian Institute for Ethical Research, mostly. They have been doing consensual psychological studies for about 300 years. We just adapted their protocols for human use and added a few improvements. You learned research ethics from another species? Of course. Why would we reinvent something that already worked perfectly well? Dr. Park looked genuinely puzzled by my surprise. Humans are really good at copying successful ideas and making them better. But I thought humans were the most advanced species in terms of psychological research. Dr. Park laughed, and the sound was genuinely delighted rather than sarcastic. Oh, goodness no. We are actually pretty terrible at understanding our own psychology. We are just really good at understanding everyone else's psychology. It's a survival trait. She gestured toward Dr. Yexel, who was still carefully reviewing his consent form. See, humans evolved in environments where we had to cooperate with other groups to survive. We got really good at reading social cues, predicting behavior, understanding motivations, but we are still figuring out how our own minds work. Then how did you become so skilled at psychological manipulation? Dr. Park's expression grew more serious. Because psychological manipulation and psychological understanding are two completely different skills. One is about control, the other is about cooperation. She pulled up another file on her tablet, this one showing comparative analyses of different species research methodologies. Your species developed psychological research as a tool for control. You studied fear so you could use it as a weapon. But that approach fundamentally limits what you can learn, because beings who are being controlled can't exhibit authentic behavior. Humans developed psychological research as a tool for cooperation. We study emotions so we can work together more effectively. And that approach gives us much more accurate data, because beings who feel safe and respected will show you their genuine responses. The Dr. Yussel finished reviewing his consent form and looked up with what I was learning to recognize as Yussian approval expressions. This all seems very reasonable, he said. I'm ready to begin when you are. Dr. Park made some notes on her tablet while I activated the holographic projection systems. But instead of the crude, threatening scenarios we'd used in my previous research, the new protocols showed carefully crafted situations designed to trigger protective instincts without causing actual distress. A young Yexian child appeared to be approaching a potentially dangerous situation. Nothing immediately threatening. Just the kind of mild hazard that would cause any parent to feel concern. Dr. Yexel's response was immediate and fascinating. His biometric readings showed elevated attention and increased activity in the neural clusters associated with protective behavior, but without the stress hormones and panic reactions we documented in our previous studies. Interesting, I muttered, watching the data streams. His risk assessment protocols are much more sophisticated than our previous measurements suggested. That's because he's not terrified, Dr. Park pointed out. His brain is actually functioning normally, so you are seeing genuine cognitive processes instead of trauma responses. The holographic scenario continued, showing the young Yuxian making various choices about how to handle the potential danger. Dr. Yuxiel's neurological activity showed complex decision-making processes that I'd never observed in our previous research. Dr. Yexel, I said during a pause in the scenario, can you tell us what you are thinking right now? I'm evaluating whether the child has enough information to make a safe decision independently, or whether I need to intervene, he replied. I'm also considering how my intervention might affect their learning process and future risk assessment abilities. I stared at him. In 30 years of fear research, no subject had ever provided such detailed rational analysis of their thought processes. That's fascinating, I said honestly. In our previous studies, subjects typically showed only binary fight or flight responses. Well, yes, Dr. Yexel said gently. If someone is torturing you, complex decision-making becomes rather difficult. The casual way he said it, without anger, without accusation, just as a simple statement of fact, hit me like a plasma burst to the cognitive center. You know, I said slowly, about our previous research methods. Everyone knows, Dr. Yexel replied. The humans weren't exactly subtle about publicizing what they found here. But that's okay. Everyone also knows you are learning better ways now. You are not angry? Afraid? Resentful? Dr. Yexel tilted his head in the gesture his species used to indicate thoughtful consideration. Should I be? You were following the research protocols you'd been taught. You didn't know there were better methods available. Now you do know, and you are changing your approach accordingly. He paused. Besides, anger and resentment are expensive emotions. They take a lot of mental energy to maintain, and they don't usually produce useful results. Forgiveness and cooperation are much more efficient. I looked at Dr. Park, who was watching this exchange with the expression humans wore when they were particularly pleased about something. Is this normal? I asked her. This level of understanding? For Yuxians? Absolutely. They are one of the most psychologically mature species in the galaxy. It's why your previous research on them was so fundamentally flawed. How so? You were studying one of the most emotionally sophisticated species in known space, using methods designed for primitive, reactive subjects. It's like trying to study quantum mechanics with a stone hammer. Dr. Park made some notes on her tablet. But it's also why Dr. Yaxel's participation in this study is so valuable. Yaxians don't just feel protective instincts, they analyze them, they consider the long-term consequences of their actions. They balance individual safety against broader social needs. She gestured toward the ongoing holographic scenario. The data we are collecting right now will help us understand how emotionally mature species handle crisis situations. That information could be crucial for designing effective emergency protocols for multi-species communities. The holographic scenario concluded, and Dr. Yaxel stretched in his chair with the satisfied expression his species showed after completing meaningful work. That was quite interesting, he said. I have never had the opportunity to observe my own protective responses in such detail. How do you feel? Dr. Park asked. Any stress, discomfort, or concerning thoughts? None at all. Actually, I feel rather good. It's nice to know that my protective instincts are functioning properly. I reviewed the data we'd collected, comparing it to similar studies from my previous research. The difference was staggering. Where our old methods had produced simple binary fear responses, this consensual study had generated complex, multi-layered psychological data that revealed sophisticated decision-making processes I'd never known existed. Dr. Park, I said, this data is extraordinary. We learned more about Yaxian protective psychology in 2 hours than we did in 5 years of previous research. And nobody got traumatized in the process, she added cheerfully. Amazing how much better science works when you are not committing ethical violations. Dr. Yaxel gathered his belongings and stood to leave. But before he reached the door, he turned back to look at me. Coordinator Blim, he said. May I give you some advice? Of course. Don't be too hard on yourself about your previous research methods. Yes, they were harmful and ethically wrong. But they were also what you were taught. The important thing is that you are learning better ways now. He paused, considering his words carefully. Besides, in a strange way, your past mistakes have made you a better researcher. You understand the difference between ethical and unethical methods in ways that someone who never made those mistakes cannot. How do you mean? You have seen what happens when science is used to cause harm. That experience will make you much more careful about ensuring your future research is beneficial. Someone who never faced that choice might not appreciate how important the ethical considerations really are. And with that surprisingly profound observation, Dr. Yaxel left the laboratory. I stood in the quiet room, surrounded by equipment that had once been used to cause suffering, but was now being used to generate understanding. The transformation felt surreal, like waking up in a different universe where the fundamental rules of reality had changed. Dr. Park, I said finally, may I ask you something personal? Sure. Why are humans helping us? After what we did, why didn't you just shut down our facility and leave us to figure things out ourselves? Dr. Park was quiet for a long moment, apparently considering how to answer. Because, she said finally, humans understand something that your species is still learning. The universe is a dangerous place, and there are real threats out there that require scientific understanding to overcome. She gestured toward the data we'd just collected. Your neurological research capabilities could help develop treatments for trauma across dozens of species. Your brain chemistry expertise could revolutionize mental health care. Your medical technology could save millions of lives, but only if we use it ethically. Exactly. And the fastest way to ensure ethical use is to teach you better methods, not to destroy your capabilities entirely. Dr. Park pulled up a final file on her tablet. A comprehensive analysis of our research station's transformation over the past 6 weeks. Besides, she added with that human smile I'd learned to associate with deeper meanings, humans are really good at turning enemies into allies. It's one of our most useful survival traits. You see us as potential allies. I see you as intelligent beings who made mistakes and are working to correct them. That's the foundation of most successful alliances. She paused, looking directly at me with those unsettling binocular eyes. But I also see you as a species that spent 30 years developing sophisticated methods for causing psychological harm. That kind of expertise doesn't just disappear because you have learned better ethics. The implication hit me like a quantum torpedo. You are saying that our knowledge of harmful techniques makes us valuable as allies? I'm saying that in a universe full of species who might use psychological warfare for destructive purposes, having allies who understand those techniques and are committed to using them only for defense and healing is extremely valuable. Dr. Park's expression grew more serious. The galaxy is bigger than just our two species. Coordinator Blim, there are threats out there that neither humans nor Corfax could handle alone. But together, with your medical expertise and our psychological warfare capabilities, with your neurological research and our ethical frameworks, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The implications were clear. You are not just teaching us better research methods, I said slowly. You are recruiting us. We are offering you a chance to use your knowledge for protection instead of harm, Dr. Park corrected. Whether you accept that offer is entirely up to you. I looked around the laboratory one more time at the equipment that had been redesigned for ethical research, at the comfortable seating areas for voluntary participants, at the monitoring systems that prioritized subject well-being over data collection. 6 weeks ago, this had been a facility for studying fear through the application of controlled terror. Now it was becoming something entirely different. A place where beings could safely explore their own psychological responses. A research center dedicated to understanding rather than exploiting. Dr. Park, I said finally, when do we start the advanced training? Her smile was brilliant and genuinely warm. Coordinator Blim, she said, you already have. And as I began to understand the true scope of what the humans had accomplished, not just the infiltration of our facility, not just the transformation of our research methods, but the conversion of an entire species from potential enemy to committed ally, I realized something that should have terrified me. We hadn't just been studying human fear. We had become the proof of concept for human psychological warfare on a civilizational scale. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like the safest place in the galaxy to be. Because humans, it turned out, were the kind of monsters who preferred to make friends rather than enemies. Even when their enemies had tried to study their fear, especially then.